Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I see a few people still finding their seats. Real pleasure to be here today. My name is Joel Gehman, and together with Vern Glazer, we're really pleased to have organized this symposium, and it was very nice of the Academy to choose it as one of their Showcase Symposiums. We're going to talk today about theory-method packages, and in particular we're going to compare three approaches to qualitative theory building. And I guess the genesis of this symposium was a pet peeve of mine. I get a lot of qualitative papers to review, and I find that they tend to cite a real strange admixture of different qualitative exemplars. And I thought it might be nice to begin to think about how do we use qualitative methods, which are really kind of tools in a toolbox, in a more disciplined way. So my idea is that some tools are good for certain purposes and other tools are good for other purposes. And today we're going to look at three different exemplars. By no means do the approaches we're going to look at today exhaust the ways that we might do theory building with qualitative research, but I think they give us a nice sense of the range of approaches that are out there, and that's part of our goal. So before we get into the program, I want to make a few thank yous. First of all, the lead sponsor for today is the OMT, or Organization and Management Theory Division. And if you don't know how the governance structure of the Academy works, they're the ones that basically gave us this room. So it's a sum-zero game. When we're here, that means someone else isn't. And so they gave us the space on the program, and then BPS and MOC have co-sponsored our event. And then we're having the session videoed, recorded today, and so we hit up our dean. So I want to thank Dean Joseph Doucette at the University of Alberta School of Business, who contributed to enable our video recording enterprise. So why the symposium? If you are in the Academy and you go to different events, you'll often hear this expression, we're a big tent. And I think that's awesome, and I think we want to celebrate that. But at the same time, I don't think that necessarily means that anything goes. And so, in this kind of metaphor, there are different pockets or niches of activity that are going on, and they all have their own, perhaps, toolkits and methodologies. Hoping to generate greater sensitivity to what it looks like when we match the ontologies and epistemologies of the methods and the theories that we're working on, or when we mismatch those. We want to increase the awareness that we have as researchers of the similarities and differences across some of these methods. So in preparing our speakers today, I've been joking, we're going to hopefully get a few sparks to fly in a good-natured way. Because after all, if there are no differences between the three approaches, then we don't need them. We can just have one. And so that's part of what we're going to do today as well. We may also see if we can articulate some additional theory-building templates that we might like to have or that we see coming into view, both for us as researchers and as reviewers. And then I would like to bring into the foreground, there's a connection between the tools that we use and the questions we ask, and vice versa. So our format today is we're really going to reserve as much time as possible to hear from the three speakers, to take questions from the audience, and then to foster some discussion and debate. The overview will have three presentations. We actually just called an audible just a few minutes ago. I'm going to start with Denny Gioia, then we'll have Kathy Eisenhardt, and then Ann Langley. And then we'll have moderated Q&A, and then we'll conclude. In terms of just a little caveat about Denny, unfortunately he had a family emergency that prevented him from being here at the Academy. However, he took time to make a pre-recorded video. And then Kevin Corley from Arizona State has generously agreed to sit in and handle the questions and answers that otherwise might have been directed at Denny. So without further ado, what I'll do is I'm going to bring up Denny Gioia. Many of you will know him. He's a full professor at Pennsylvania State University, and he's going to talk about what has been affectionately known as the Gioia method.
Hi, I'm Denny Gioia. First, my apologies that I could not be with you in person, but instead must be with you virtually. I'd particularly like to thank my longstanding collaborator, Kevin Corley, for sitting in for me during the live discussion part of this symposium. That role probably condemns him to taking all of whatever flack is forthcoming while I get to escape. I'd also like to thank Joel Gehman and Vern Glazer for organizing this little get-together. For those of you who don't know me, this is it. This is the face that goes with that strange name. Actually, my name is easy to pronounce, if you're Italian, I suppose. It's Gioia, and you can remember it because it's a straightforward translation from the Italian for joy. As a little sidebar, I'm now up to 76 documented misspellings of my name. See, I'm a researcher. I document stuff. If any of you in the audience can top that number, well, I don't think it's all that much of an accomplishment. So, to a few words on the methodology that I've been developing for quite a long time now, but only wrote up as a methods piece relatively recently in 2013 in Organizational Research Methods. Here's the opening passage from that article. What does it take to imbue an inductive study with qualitative rigor, while still retaining the creative, revelatory potential for generating new concepts and ideas for which such studies are best known? How can inductive researchers apply systematic, conceptual, and analytical rigor that leads to credible interpretations of data and also helps to convince readers that the conclusions are plausible and defensible? For the past 25 years, I've been working to design and develop an approach to conducted grounded theory, interpretive research to accomplish just these aims. My main focus has been on the processes by which organizing and organization unfold, with a tip of the hat to my old friend Anne Langley, who articulated the processual view so very well in 1999. My approach revolves around what I consider to be perhaps the single most profound recognition in social and organizational study, that much of the world with which we deal is socially constructed. And this recognition means that studying this world requires an approach that captures the organizational experience in terms that are adequate at the level of meaning of the people living that experience, and adequate at the level of social scientific theorizing about that experience. Quite honestly, I was also motivated to devise a systematic methodology for conducting inductive research because too many non-qualitative scholars simply don't believe that inductive approaches are rigorous enough to demonstrate scientific advancement. When I started out on this project, I dare say that most researchers, Kathy Eisenhardt notably accepted, saw qualitative research as a way to report impressions and cherry-pick quotes that supported those impressions, a variation on the old theme of, "My mind is made up, do not confuse me with the facts." The big question then was, how can creative and imaginative traditions of qualitative inductive research in organizational study be reconciled with a scientific tradition of rigorous theoretical advancement? That's not a trivial question. It's not unreasonable for other scholars to ask, how the hell do you know anyway? Or more civilly, how can I have confidence in your assertions and conclusions? Beyond that basic assumption that the organizational world is socially constructed, my methodological approach is predicated on another critical assumption, that my informants are knowledgeable agents. And yeah, I know, that term is a classic grandiose example of academese. But it's a wonderfully descriptive term anyway. It means that people at work know what they are trying to do, and that they can explain to me quite knowledgeably what their thoughts, emotions, intentions, and actions are. They get it. They're not even close to Garfinkel's rich notion of cultural dopes, so I always foreground the informant's interpretations. The implications of this assumption are, however, pretty profound. Perhaps most importantly, it puts me, the researcher, in the role of glorified reporter of the informant's experience and their interpretations of that experience. And I'm not at all insulted by this subordinate role. Oh, I guess I get a little jealous that other forms of qualitative research give people what I call a license to be brilliant, whereas I'm bound by my oath to be faithful to my informant's constructions of reality. But I've discovered over the years that my self-imposed restraint gives me a different kind of license. Above all, though, I'm not so presumptuous that I impose prior concepts, constructs, or theories on the informants to understand or explain their understanding of their experience. I go out of my way to give voice to the informants. Anyway, one of my opening stance is one of well-intended ignorance. I really don't pretend to know what my informants are experiencing, and I don't presume to have some silver bullet theory that might explain their experience. I adopt an approach of willful suspension of belief concerning previous theorizing. And here's a quick example of why it's important to suspend prior theory. 25 years ago, I was researching strategic change in academia. At the time, the received wisdom was that strategic managers thought about issues as either threats or opportunities. I just wasn't sure that was true in academia, so in my interviews of university upper echelons executives, I pointedly did not use those terms. Perhaps surprisingly, in 3 months of interviews, not once did any of them refer to issues in threat-opportunity terms. They saw issues as either strategic or political. And when the study was over, I asked about it, and one of the informants said to me, "Oh, I can use those terms if you like, but that's not the way we think about the issues around here." Of course, I'm never completely uninformed about prior work. I'm not a dope or a dummy either, but I try not to let my existing knowledge get in the way. I assume that I'm a fairly knowledgeable agent too. I've worked in responsible positions in organizations. I understand the organizational context from an on-the-ground, gotta-make-a-decision-now point of view, not merely from an abstract theoretical perspective. I also am half decent at figuring out patterns in data and formulating concepts and relationships in theoretically relevant terms. These assumptions and stances led me to devise an approach that allowed for a systematic presentation of both first-order analysis, an analysis derived from informant-centric terms or codes, and a second-order analysis derived from researcher-centric concepts, themes, and dimensions. As the research progresses, I start looking for similarities and differences among emergent categories. I bend over backwards to give those categories labels that retain informant's terms, if at all possible. I then consider the constellation of first-order codes. Is there some deeper structure or process here that I can understand at a second-order theoretical level? When all the first-order codes and second-order themes and dimensions have been assembled, I then have the basis for building a data structure, which is perhaps the most pivotal step in the entire research approach, because it shows the progression from raw data of first-order codes to second-order theoretical themes and dimensions, which is an important part of demonstrating rigor in qualitative research. To me, the data structure is indispensable. I kind of have a guiding mantra for the data structure, and expressed colloquially, it goes like this. You got no data structure, you got nothing. And I know, the statement is over the top, but it keeps me focused on getting evidence for my conclusions. As important as the data structure might be, it nonetheless is only a static photograph, if you will, of inevitably dynamic phenomena. It allows insight into the content of my informant's worlds, the boxes in a boxes and arrows diagram, if you will. But you can't understand process unless you can articulate the arrows. So that photograph needs to be converted into a movie that sets the concepts in motion and constitutes the Holy Grail, the grounded theory itself. The grounded theory is generated by showing the dynamic relationships among the emergent concepts. And properly done, the translation from data structure to grounded theory clearly illustrates the data to theory connections that reviewers so badly want to see these days. Of course, there's an opportunity for inspiration in this process too, what I like to call the grand Shazam, some flash of insight about how the revealed processes explain how or why some phenomenon plays out. And I sometimes use a biological metaphor to describe the transformation from data structure to grounded theory model. If you think of the data structure as the anatomy of the grounded theory, then the grounded model becomes the physiology of that theory. And writing the grounded theory section then amounts to explaining the relationship between the anatomy and the physiology that yields a systematically derived, dynamic, inductive theoretical model that describes or explains the processes and phenomena under investigation. So that's that in a nutshell. There are a number of issues that I would like to address about the way this methodology has been implemented over the years by others. The first is that the first order, second order of analysis terminology seems to have become increasingly prevalent in recent years. As one of my colleagues put it, is that it? Are we all going to talk only in terms of first and second order findings in our research reporting now? Is that a good thing? And my answer is, oh, good grief, I hope not. No, it's not a good thing. I'm a big tent kind of guy. I have no desire to see this systematic approach become the template for qualitative research. Another colleague said that the approach is creating a kind of arms race where each study has to outdo the other on demonstrating its qualitative rigor. Lord, I hope that's not true either, especially when it gets to the point of feeling that we need to include coding reliability statistics in our reporting. That sort of outcome will play directly into the hands of critics who see the methodology as an example of creeping positivism, a statement that gives me the willies. I developed this approach mainly because I'm also an evidence-based guy. I just believe that the presentation of evidence matters. And I've become my own victim, too. One of my own recent reviewers said, this approach is just getting too common, and simply asked if I couldn't please figure out some other approach. Oh, the benefits of blind review. Although I'm not sure reviewers would ask people not to use multiple regression, for instance, if it were appropriate to answer the research question posed. And finally, I'm concerned that so many scholars seem to be treating it mainly as a presentational tactic, which offends my sensibilities. I designed this thing as a systematic way of thinking about, designing, executing, and writing up qualitative research, the full Monty. The approach is meant to systematize your thinking while providing the wherewithal to discover revelatory stuff. It galls me to think that people are using it as a formulaic presentational technique. Remember, it's a methodology, not just a method or set of cookbook techniques. I'd like to conclude by briefly addressing some questions that the organizers posed to the panel members. First of which, I covered the first. The second one was, what counts as theory from within your method or approach? Well, it's a methodology specifically designed to generate a grounded theory. So the emergent theory rooted in the data constitutes the theory. How does your method or approach connect with theory building? Again, properly used, it leads to the generation of a grounded theory. So its raison d'etre is to facilitate theory building itself. How does your method or approach compare and contrast with other familiar methods? Anne Langley's the purest among us. She does pure process research, and it is beautiful. I consider myself a pure interpretivist, but sometimes I think Anne thinks I've gone astray with my focus on systematic techniques for studying process. My work is much different from Kathy Eisenhardt's, as her work is usually multi-case study comparisons and focused in some way on what I might term hypothesis assessment. Lastly, when and for what kind of theory is your method or approach especially appropriate? Short answer, new theory, or some transmogrification of existing theory where appropriate. So that's it. I turn it over now to Kevin to translate what I said into English. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for coming this afternoon. I appreciate it. And I appreciate Joel and Vern organizing the panel, the OMT division for being our lead sponsor, as well as MOC and BPS. It's a pleasure to be on a panel with Denny, with Kevin and with Anne, of course. So thanks for coming. All right, let me just tell you a little bit about what my agenda is going to be. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the method that I'm associated with. I hesitate to call it the Eisenhardt method, although Anne has called it that and said reviewers used to annoy her telling her she should use the Eisenhardt method. And now that I'm being told to use the Gioia method, I have new empathy for that. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about theory building from cases, drawing on some of my earlier work, both alone and with Melissa Graebner. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think is actually the convergence between most of theory building research, including Denny and Anne. And this is actually coming out in a new AMJ FTE by myself, Scott Sonnenschein, and Melissa Graebner. So I hope you'll take a look at that if you're interested in the topic. And then I'm going to conclude, if you go to sleep now, is that these approaches are a lot more the same than they are different. So that's going to be the punchline. First of all, what's theory building from case studies? Which looks so, isn't there a yogurt brand that looks kind of like that? Anyway, this is theory building from case studies. It's really the combination of two things. On the one hand, it's the combination of grounded theory building, so very much rooted in the tradition of Glaser and Strauss, going from theory where you hopefully walk in the door at wherever you are, and you don't really have a preconception of what you're going to see. You don't know what relationships you're going to see. You may have a guess about the constructs, but you're fundamentally going in open-minded, if you will. So, and I think Denny described that, I think, very well, and that's exactly the way I see it as well. I also usually make the point that when we're theory building, whether it's myself or Denny or Anne, that there are other people theory building too, and they're using formal models, mathematical models, or they might be armchair theorizing. So the real contrast in what we're all doing is we're contrasting with those methods. And I also like to use the analogy that just as math keeps formal theory honest, it's data and being true to the data that keeps theory building the way we all are doing it honest as well, and why we're not just reporting what we felt like seeing. The second part of this method is the idea of a case study. And here I'm drawing on Robert Yin, and the idea is a case study is a rich empirical instance of some phenomenon, typically using multiple data sources. A case can be a person, it can be a group, it can be an organization, and there can also be cases within cases, so one can imagine a single organization with multiple cases in it. That said, not all qualitative research is theory building from case studies. Not all case study research is theory building. Some of it is deductive. When do you use theory building from case study? And actually, I think more broadly our methods. But typically, I've focused on situations where there's either no or problematic theory. So to give you an example, Melissa Graebner did work on acquisitions. And if you know the acquisition literature at all, you know 95 or more % of the acquisition literature is from the point of view of the buyer. And she took the point of view of the seller. Or I did some work with Pinar Ozkan on networks. And if you know network theory, you know that's mostly a world of the rich get richer. If you have a tie, you get a tie, and so forth. And we wanted to look at a world where you didn't have any ties, and how did that network get started? We also look in complex processes. So for example, situations where there's actually configurations. Situation where there are multiple paths through the data, either leading to good things or bad things. Also equifinality. So complex processes. This is a little bit less than what I do, but difficult to measure constructs. Here, I think this is actually what Denny does. I think identity is a very hard construct to measure very reliably, in, let's say, using surveys. I think Denny has been particularly strong. His work is particularly strong in dealing with hard-to-measure constructs. But another example is Wendy Smith, for example, trying to deal with paradox, another construct that's hard to deal with. Also useful when you have some sort of unique exemplar. So to use an example, Mary Tripsis and Giovanni Gavetti looking at Polaroid Corporation, a company that looked like it had everything going for it and yet couldn't change and get out of its own way. So a unique exemplar as well. And I think that may be a bit more where Anne often plays, although I'll let Anne say where she plays. But in general, I think all of us are united by process questions, how do things happen questions, as opposed to what and how much questions. What to do? I thought maybe I'd step through. I believe in knowing the literature, and actually I took some time before this event to read over both Anne's 99 piece and Denny and Kevin, and I think there was Amy Hamilton, the 2013 piece. And I think there's a lot of similarities in how this part of the way we approach the world. Know the literature. I believe in knowing the literature, that you can't know what's undiscovered if you don't know the literature, and then you look for a problem where you truly don't know the answer. And so you can't find those problems if you don't actually know the literature. And then I think you also have to at least start the research with a research question. That may not be your question at the end, that may not be your only question, but I think it's crazy making to try and go in with no question. So going in with a question. The next two things that you do, I think, are particularly important, and I think, again, cross over regardless of the kind of inductive work you do. And that is the idea of research design and theoretical sampling. That becomes particularly important in multi-case. I think it's maybe less of an issue in single case, where I think people are a bit more drawn to an exemplar or maybe a case that's particularly convenient for them. But in multi-case, what you're trying to do is you're trying to, on the one hand, control the variation, and on the other hand, focus your attention on the variation that you care about. So, for example, one research design is what we call the racing design. And this is a design where you start, let's say, 5 firms at a particular point in time, at a particular market, and let them race to something in the future. So, for example, the work with Pinar Ozcan that I mentioned before starts in the mobile gaming industry. 5 firms start out at a particular time, and then we see what happens at the end, and it turns out some die and some do well, and some are sort of in the middle, and we think about that. But that's sort of an explicit design. Another design is sort of an ex post polar types design, so good and bad. Another design is around controlling antecedents. So, for example, I did some work with Jason Davis on understanding R&D alliances with major incumbents. And what particularly Jason did in that study was read the alliance literature. He knew what the antecedent conditions were for good alliances, like we've been partners before, we're experienced, we have good resources. And we selected on all those reasons why alliances usually work, and then looked at the ones, and then we just looked at a random sample. But we'd already kicked out all the ones that were obviously not going to work because that wasn't very interesting. So research design, basically the theoretical sampling, I think is critical in most of all we're doing, particularly in multi-case. And it is particularly difficult for deductive researchers when they're reviewing your paper to get what you're doing, because they want you to be random sampling and you're not. Another thing that you do after you're sort of working on your research design, you're also doing data collection. And here I think what unites us all is we're all into deep immersion in whatever setting we're in. And perhaps I and some other people a bit more maybe than Denny are more into varied sources rather. So, for example, I think ethnography techniques can be very exciting for certain kinds of studies, where you're not asking anybody anything, and and in fact, they may not know anything, or even if they do know something, they won't tell you. So in contrast to an interpretivist, an ethnographer would actually look and watch what people were doing that they either couldn't say or they wouldn't say. So observation, interview techniques is obviously an important one for most studies, archival, surveys, Twitter feeds, really all kinds of, I'm also a believer you can have numbers, but essentially I did a little survey of what people think qualitative research means, and actually I couldn't really find a definition, although the best definition was qualitative research uses multiple kinds of data, deep immersion in multiple kinds of data. So I think that's a real characteristic. Some of us may prefer some data versus others, but the inherent methodology is about multiple types of data that help reveal whatever that phenomenon is you happen to be looking at. Next step is around grounded theory building. And there was a time when I started in this world, I called what I did grounded theory building. And then there was that interpretivist beatdown of anybody who used the grounded theory building term and they didn't, cite Strauss and Corbin and so on. Although I did notice that Glaser wasn't in that anymore. And I guess they had a feud, although I don't really know what happened, or do I care? But in any event, I think it's now become, as Barney Glaser at the end of, I think I've got it somewhere else in here, but Walsh and about 3 or 4 names and Glaser are now saying, is that the grounded theory building is a big tent world, and it really is about taking data and building a theory. And it almost invariably involves doing something like observing the data, breaking it up into, Denny calls it first order, second order, I call it measures and constructs, but something where you're taking that, that basic data, you're measuring it, or you're doing first order codes, and then you're abstracting at a higher level. And regardless of the terms that you use, that's what everybody is doing. And then there are variations, and actually Anne's done some really nice work on how you gain creative insight. Some really clever techniques of how you actually go to that creative process. Because I don't think Denny meant it that way, but I think he glossed over the degree to which there is insight, and it's not mechanical. And I know Denny's not mechanical. That one actually has to come up with clever ways of breaking your mindset to think about it in new ways. So in my world, we typically are in multiple case. We typically will do a longitudinal history of each case, or maybe cases within cases. We'll then do some cross-case, pattern recognition. We try to develop measures at the same time as we're thinking about theory. As it gets a little more advanced, we roll in other literature, both in our field as well as in other fields. So for example, Chris Bingham and I have done some work, and we will often, because it's on learning, we will often bring in cognitive science, so get outside of our base disciplines. And then come up with, and then we iterate with the literature and come up with a logical explanation that we term the whys. We have construct A, we have construct B, or second order code, if I can translate there, a little French and Spanish there. But the underlying connection between why A leads to B is extremely important in the world that I live in. So that's the whys. What are the 1, 2, 3 logical reasons why A and B are related? And it could be a logical argument. You could draw on prior research, or you could draw on prior research from other places, or you could draw on what the informants say, or you might do all of those things. But your underlying, you want to go from the study where you went and let's say you served a bunch of companies and you saw that CEOs with blue eyes did better. If you couldn't come up with an underlying reason why blue-eyed CEOs were better, you didn't have a theory, you just had a correlation. So that's a really important point. Then there's the issue of writing, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I'm going to say some more about it later. But essentially in my papers there's probably a formula, and I think in the people who follow what I do or do similar things, we're a little on the formulaic side, as is Denny. But essentially the idea of having some sort of overarching diagram, presenting our findings or themes or propositions or whatever you want to call them, interweaving those with examples and going through 3 or 4, maybe 5, ideas or themes or whatever. I think Denny mentioned that I'm a proposition person. I'm a proposition person if that's what my reviewers want. I don't actually care personally. My reviewer says propositions, I'm good. If not, they're gone. But I do have some kind of theme, usually. And again, this underlying theoretical argument is very important. So that's a little bit, let me go back to that. That's a little bit about theory building from cases, at least how I've thought about it, and I think people who have enjoyed the method and use the method the way they use it too. Now I want to, as I said, the agenda was talk about my stuff, now talk a little bit about the broader field. So now I'm slipping to the broader field. Because I actually have become a big believer that a lot of us who are doing theory building research, we're basically all doing the same thing, and we're basically all on the same team. That we're all using diverse data sources with deep immersion in the phenomenon. And in fact, that's the name, that's why we always get qualitative, even though I'm not sure that's a good word for us. I think we're all doing theoretical sampling, we're not doing random sampling. And we're all doing grounded theory building, whether we're following the Bible of grounded theory building or the spirit of grounded theory building by going from data to theory. I think that's what unites the panel. I think that's what unites much of qualitative research, although there are qualitative researchers who do other things. But the people who see themselves as theory builders, we're all doing this. And so when I read over the article that Kevin and Denny and Amy wrote, I'm seeing, I know this, I believe this is kind of where I'm coming from too. So where do we differ? We differ in writing. And we differ in writing for some very good reasons. Well, we differ in some other things too. I think Denny is more of a pure interpretivist than I am. I don't call myself an impure interpretivist. I used to call myself a positivist, but I don't do that anymore. I don't cringe at positivism. I think this approach is not particularly locked into an epistemological or an ontological point of view, but it is locked into a 40-page page limit. And it turns out that if you're a single case person versus a person who's doing 5 or 6 or 8 cases, you have a different writing challenge. And so I know the diss on, let's say, my work and people like me's work is, well, we don't see any description. And my shot back is, and how are we going to do that in 40 pages? We can't. And so we can't do certain kinds of writing that other people can do. So there's really quite a difference, I think, in writing, in the writing challenge that we have. And so, for example, Denny said I couldn't live without a data structure. I don't want a data structure. I don't have room for a data structure because data structure has no data in it. I'm going to show you the same thing in construct tables later. Don't make me do a data structure. Same thing with the data and themes table. I can't do a data and themes table because there's two problems in multiple cases. First of all, you got to fit all the cases in. And then secondly, you've got to show that case 1 is fitting with case 2, case 3, case 4. And if you do data and themes table, you can't show that because all you're showing is a piece here, a piece there, a piece there. You can't see replication logic in that. Replication logic requires you to see it in case 1, case 2, case 3. And so if you push people to data structure and data and themes, it's deeply problematic, certainly for the kind of work I do, and it's problematic, I think, for other people. Just got to see where I'm going with this. Yeah, okay. A couple of idiosyncratic preferences that I have. I like multiple cases better than single, although I recognize there are unique exemplars or there are data challenges or so on. And I think some single cases are actually multi-case because they actually do break up and compare. But I will say I've never seen in my own studies a single case that told me as nearly as much as 2, 3, 4 cases told me. It was just too idiosyncratic. And it led to, I think, an overdetermined theory in the mathematical sense. Second thing I think I personally have a preference for is I'm into theory and an explicit and a generalizable theory. And so I'm interested in why A and B go together, not just that A and B do go together. And I'm also interested I'm actually happy to engage with deductive research and control and measure in that language. If it's the same word, I'm into the same word. Because at the end of the day, we theory build and they theory test. And so I say, we rule, they do our work. But I think we want to be able to connect to the deductive researchers. I'm probably running out of time, so maybe just a couple last things. In the new paper, we talk about rigor and rigor mortis. What's not rigorous, what's rigor mortis? Requiring specific formats, like the data structure. There is no data in a data structure. I understand why it works for Denny. I don't think it works for everybody. Data and themes doesn't work with multi-case. I don't think it works if you don't do interview data, and I don't think it particularly works well if you do time-varying data. Second, rigor mortis, the rigid analysis steps. Feeling like there's a Bible, turning grounding theory building into a religion, not a technique. And then I think my third pet peeve, and I think rigor mortis that we were talking about in our article, is excessive transparency. What matters is the sampling and the data. I don't need to know every step of your journey. I don't even want to know every step of your journey. I want to get to what you actually found. And in particularly, I think that in doing our article, we surveyed about 30 inductive researchers, not just like me, but all kinds of them. And this was so incredibly what everybody's saying, that linearized, I did step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, is for most people, kabuki theater. We're not doing that. You can't do that. It's a much more creative process that you can't turn into some sort of linear, mindless step-by-step, that just isn't the way it is. What is rigor? And here I think we're probably all in agreement. It's about a strong theory that's logical, that's parsimonious, that's accurate, that we have concepts or second-order themes, if you prefer that terminology, that we know what they are, they're defined, they're distinct, and they're well-measured, meaning they're well-grounded in whatever the theory is, and you're coming up with something insightful. And I think regardless of who you are in this room, and whether you're an ethnographer or an interpretivist or you're a multi-case person or you're a process person or I don't know, those other kind of people, whoever you might be, I think at the end of the day, if you're a theory builder, it's about, is it a strong theory in the traditional sense? Are the concepts grounded in the data in a plausible, realistic way? And is there something insightful and interesting about what you had to say? And so to conclude, I think we may have techniques that we're using that are different for different kinds of problems. Denny being the single case interpretivist, mine more of a multi-case. But let's get past those minor points. Let's focus on doing great research. And let's remember that 90% of the academy is deductive researchers. And so let's play on the same team. So thanks.
Well, thank you very much. That was great. Next up is going to be Anne Langley from HEC Montreal, and she's going to talk to us about the method she's become associated with on process research.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Joel and Vern, for organizing this, and I'm really honored to be on this panel with Kathy and Denny and Kevin. So I have titled the talk here, Process Research Methods. Please notice the S. So I don't have a method. And I think that I also have a feeling that trying to reduce the world to one method is really not a good idea. So part of my message is that. I don't have one method, but I do have a position, and it's about the importance of looking at process. And that's my starting point. I'm not denying the importance of looking at other kinds of research as well, but my interest is in process, and so I'm interested in any kinds of methods that can help us do that. And I originally wrote the 1999 paper about process research methods because of a puzzling of how on earth can I analyze these data that are processual. And it was a sort of a way to help me think about what we could do. So I'm going to orient the, to talk around this. And so just to get us started, so the one way to think about, to divide up the world of theorizing is to talk about two different kinds of theorizing. And it's the one on the right that I'm going to be talking about. So variance thinking is what most of us actually do as social scientists, which is look at the relationships between variables. That's the kind of understanding of the world that a lot of us tend to promote. I'm interested in a different kind of understanding of the world where we think about how things work over time. So the form of understanding is very much based on flows of activities and events over time. And it turns out that variables and events are really quite different entities. So you do very often need quite different methods to deal with them. And so those little diagrams there, which are in my 1999 paper, sort of represent how you might explain innovation in two different ways. One at looking at the factors that might be correlated with it, and one at looking, what are the processes, what are the things you actually have to do to produce it? So those are the two kinds of ways of thinking about the world. Why is that important? And I think it has to be, well, first of all, it's important because time is the only thing we can't escape. It's a very central part of the world we live in, and it's totally surprising that still a lot of our research doesn't even take it into account. It's might be a lag, but it is not fundamentally there. So that's the first reason. A second reason is that process is extremely practically important. we may know, for example, we know that bigger organizations tend to have economies of scale, and because of that, they may be able to be more profitable. I mean, over a kind of a general kind of generalization. But if you're a small organization, that doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't tell you what to do. You must get bigger. Okay, but you can't get bigger instantaneously. And so by not considering, by using a variance understanding, which is A is better than B, you have not captured the movement. And that movement is so important. It can make all the difference. One way of getting bigger is to merge with another organization, and there will be all kinds of synergies that will emerge. But the process of actually obtaining those results, as many, many organizations have noticed, if you forget about that, you're in real trouble. So that's another reason why it's important. A third reason I think it's important is we often forget that it takes a huge amount of work and activity to stay in the same place. And that it would be important to understand what it is we have to do to stay in the same place. The world has to sustain itself, and so process, the activity and effort involved in that is very important. And a final reason why process thinking is important is that if we just think about the usual variance study, it has an outcome. It's usually organizational performance. And it's a kind of a static thing. But we all know that everything we do has multiple rippling, unpredictable consequences that spread themselves out over time. There are short-term effects, and there are long-term effects. One of the studies that I did that sort of brought this home to me was when I was studying organizational change, and we found situations where CEOs and their management teams were very successful in achieving the change, but because they upset so many people, they got fired. And so that you had to start all over again. So the multiple spreading out of consequences over time is something we should not forget. And process research doesn't stop the clock. It always goes on. In fact, one of the questions that Joel and Vern asked is, when do you stop collecting data? Well, I have a problem with that because the world, so far at least, there's always been another second to study. So those are some of the reasons why process thinking is important. So then, how to study it? So there is no one best way. So I think that this is a very important message. There are lots of ways. And in the 1999 paper, I think that's what I wanted to indicate, that there are lots of ways of approaching a huge database of process that describes processes. And these are not necessarily better or worse, but they just do different things. They produce different modes of understanding of the world. And it's good to know about some of the options that are available. That said, I do have a few principles and suggestions about how you might try to generate convincing and theoretically insightful process studies. And these are based on my own research, but also on that of other people. And notably, if you're interested in process research, we had an AMJ special forum on process studies of change in organization, which we did with Clive Smallman, Harry Sukas, and Andy van der Ven, which came out in 2013. And there's a really nice collection of 13 articles in that special issue, which illustrate different facets of process research. So in the remainder of this talk, I may refer to some of the papers in that special issue. And in fact, I'm going to on the next slide. Because one of the key principles of process research is that you have to actually study things over time. And It's a prerequisite. So this is kind of not avoidable. Requires rich longitudinal data, and here are some examples of the kinds of data that we're talking about. And doesn't have to be interviews and observations. There's a lovely paper by April Wright and Ray Zamuto in that special issue, which is archival data, but it's temporarily embedded data where you actually have minutes of meetings of the Marylebone Cricket Club in enormous detail, showing how the rules of cricket actually changed over time and the forces that led to that. Many papers looking at using ethnography, so Jason J., Locke and Durand, Bruns, these are deep ethnographies, mixed archival and real-time methods on some other papers. The Monet et al. Paper, there was over 600 interviews, a huge merger over several years. Now, that looks as if you're going to never finish your thesis, right? So let's step back from that. I mean, what's important is that the data fit with the time span of the process that you're studying. So you can do a process study of something that doesn't last very long. You could do a process study of a symposium at the Academy of Management, which lasts an hour and a half, as long as you have the longitudinal blow-by-blow data. So maybe somebody could study the video that comes out of this session, and that could be process data. You can study a meeting, you can study a project. So it's really a question of the fine, you would then want to study it in very, very fine detail, but it's a question of having the data that is longitudinal. And if you're going to be using interviews, well, maybe you can interview people about events that happened, but if you start to interview them about what some of Denny is doing about how they interpreted things over time, you really want to have your interviews, you want to have your interviews in real time, because people cannot remember what their cognitions realistically 3 years ago. So the data has to fit the needs of the project. So that's one principle that I would put forward. And in the 1999 paper, I, at that time, came up with these 7 ways of analyzing those data once you have them. And I think they were okay. I think that there's a lot more stuff out there than that, and so it probably is not enough here. I also think that it was not sufficiently emphasized in the paper, although it is there if you read it carefully, the fact that these methods are just things that you mix and match in various different ways, and so they're not single methods. But I'd just like to sort of put an arrow or two on this. So the grounded theory method, or the way I described it in that paper, is very much what Denny was talking about. So, I mean, Denny's work clearly is one approach to doing process research. I also had Kathy in there with a comparative case approach, which is another way of doing process research, although I felt that Kathy's approach tended to move towards a variance kind of theorizing. So the data are processual, but quite often the theory isn't. And this is not universally true of all Kathy's work, but it was for some of the stuff I was referring to then. And I have great admiration for both of those approaches. I think they are wonderful. I think they have made qualitative research legitimate for us, and this is absolutely essential. But those are 2 approaches. I could talk about some of the other ones here. I'm just going to talk very briefly about 2, which I like a lot, which I think are useful for process analysis. And One of them is visual mapping, and one of them is temporal bracketing, which is a form of sampling in a way. Visual mapping, I mean, one of the things is that that is nice to be able to do, that you can do with process data, is looking at temporal sequences. And this is an example, whoops, yeah, these are the two. That's an example of a visual mapping strategy that I use for a particular paper. And it is able to show sequence over time. And what this emphasizes is precisely ordering, sequence, events, activities, choices, entities which we tend to forget about when we are focusing on categories and on variables. So this is a different kind of approach to looking at your data. A second type of approach, which I think is very useful if you're using doing process studies, it's a little bit, it kind of simplifies a little bit the temporal flow of things over time. The problem with temporality is every second is a new thing is going on. But I found it a kind of useful approximation to try and decompose processes into phases. And these phases are not necessarily theoretically relevant in themselves. They're just continuous episodes separated by discontinuities. And they can become units of analysis for comparison over time. And this is a different form of replication. It's like longitudinal replication. You can explore the recurrence of process phenomena over time by doing this. And I've listed some examples of just, if I have time. Yeah? 3 minutes? Okay. Well, I'll just show the diagram. It just gives you a sort of an impressionistic idea. So Jean-Louis Denis, Geneviève Dampierre, and Linda Rouleau and myself, we have a paper in organization science which is called Escalating Indecision. That's the first part of the title, and then the rest explains what it's really about. This is our model of escalating indecision, and it's based on the idea that a lot of infrastructure projects, and in this case it was a merger, people seem to get trapped in a sort of never-ending decision-making cycle that they're not able to get out of. So there's lots of decision-making in terms of sitting around making decisions and doing stuff, but no actual decision being produced, okay? And so how does this happen? So this is our model of that, and we suggest in this paper that there are two kinds of practices which are tied together which make this happen. One is a practice where people are continually making the decision, very, very important. We need to stay together, we need to do this, we need to take this decision. The world will fall apart if we do not manage to work together. And the other kind of practice is strategic ambiguity, where in order for us to be able to stay together, we cover over our differences. We paste them over with ambiguity. And so we are continually producing decisions that embed the need for more decision-making, because we haven't clarified what we're doing. So this is a model. And what we did in this study is we showed how they keep on doing this again and again and again. And so this is a way of replicating over time a particular process, and so that it kind of adds credibility to the whole process. It doesn't manifest itself with exactly the same things at each phase, but it does manifest itself. So there are practices of making things ambiguous. There are practices of assigning importance, and the two are kind of tied together in this dialectic which comes back and back and back. And in fact, one of the ways of resolving it, which was why we call it escalating indecision, is to make your decision even more open and complicated, which makes it even more difficult to resolve. But I mean, this is an example of what we do. So that's another example. Another point I want to make, and I sort of made it at the beginning, is that depending on which of the strategies you use, the kind of theory that you're going to produce will be different. And this is one of the questions we wanted to talk about. So if you're using a narrative strategy and using the grounded theory strategy of the type that Denny and Kevin are talking about, you're going to be developing an interpretive theory. You're going to be focusing on the sense given by participants to a phenomenon. If you're using a comparative strategy or a quantitative strategy, you're going to be talking about a different kind of theory. It's about predictions. And I think that's what Kathy is talking about. She's interested in developing causal relationships between variables, which are demonstrated empirically in the data, and which also have a theoretical explanation attached to them that can be generalized and that can be tested in further research. Another kind of theoretical product is a pattern. So you sort of see the sense that there's similarity in different organizations. There's a sort of a surface pattern, and visual mapping is very good at doing that. It has other problems. And then there's a kind of theorizing which is around mechanisms, which is the sense of the driving forces which are producing the things that we see empirically. So there are different ways of looking at that. I really should finish, right? One more slide. Okay. So I thought in my last slide I might do something that would be interesting to you or interested perhaps in process research. When we edited the special issue of AMJ, one of the reasons why papers were rejected will not surprise you. There was no theoretical contribution. So what I have here is some reasons why there was no theoretical contribution, and it may give you some ideas about, what does it mean making theory with qualitative data. So, and I think some forms of sense-making are more likely to be recognized as making a theoretical contribution. So here are some reasons why paper was rejected. First of all, no theorizing. So essentially having a narrative, right? And that's it. So, and this is a quote from a review: "The case is interesting and well written. It could be useful in a strategic management course." So that will not get you published. And here's a second one, which I call anti-theorizing. So this is taking the received view, okay? So this is taking your case, putting it against what you call the received view, which is usually a very rational kind of theorizing, and saying, well, actually, it's not like that. That also will not anymore, it used to, but that will not anymore get you a paper. So saying things are messy, that's not enough. The third one is illustrative theorizing. And this is what happens when you're starting out with a theory and applying it to your qualitative data. This is tempting, but it's not particularly convincing because you don't seem to be testing anything really, you're just labeling stuff. So this, I call that illustrative theorizing. The analysis is a form of labeling. Here's something that happened, and this is what it would be called in our theoretical framework. It's not a test of the framework, but a mapping exercise. So that's a third one, which doesn't work. And a fourth one, which doesn't work, and I associated pattern creation with visual mapping, and so visual mapping on its own is really not enough, which is finding regularities, but not really explaining them. So we have here, the author divides the chronology into phases and claims to have found a temporal pattern, but the patterns are empirical regularities rather than a fully theorized phenomenon. And so the example I always give here is there's a very nice process research by Connie Gersick, which many of you may know. It's about how groups make decisions, groups with a deadline. And she finds with 8 different groups that they do it bang in the middle. Bang in the middle, they shift the way they're thinking. So is that a theory? As such, it's not. It's just a pattern. And one of the things that Connie mentioned when she was writing about this study is that this was what gave her enormous amount of trouble publishing the paper, because you need a theory to explain that. You know, you may feel that it's right. When I asked this, my class, half the class thinks that, yeah, this makes sense, and the other half doesn't, and we have an argument about it. But you have to think, what's the theory that explains this? So there is a sort of a theory, which is that, you know, when halfway there, you know, you look at there, and you think, oh, okay, I better do something. So that's the kind of theory. But just seeing the pattern isn't enough. And finally, the last one is the patchwork theorizing, which you take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from elsewhere, and you stick the whole thing together, but it's not anything in particular. So I think I need another slide.
Okay, let's make it the last one.
Last one. Yeah. So, yeah, so I thought that maybe you would like to know which kinds of theorizing can make a contribution. So just briefly, I mean, some of the things that came up were how dialectics and contradiction constituted a process motor. Philippe Monet and colleagues were looking at that. Another one, multi-level interaction between microprocesses and macroprocesses and how one grew out of the other. Joel and colleagues have a very nice paper on that. And a third kind of contribution was where people were looking at what I mentioned at the beginning, the dynamics of stability, how the work you need to do to stay in the same place. I'll stop.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Do that.
Very good, excellent. Now Vern Glazer is going to help coordinate some questions from the audience in the time that we have left.
So if you have some questions, maybe if you could come over to the side and we'll answer those. We'll bring those to the panel. So if you maybe come up here, I'll give you a chance to ask the question. While people are thinking about their question, I'd like to open up with a question for each of you. You've talked a lot about the similarities between each of your styles and about how qualitative research is a big tent, but there's still a sense where, as researchers, we have to make decisions about what templates to use. And each of the templates that we talked about are very different. So I'd like each of you to maybe comment a little bit about how do we go about deciding which template to use and how much bricolage between the templates do you think is appropriate to use? And maybe why you might see the other templates not be appropriate for your particular style of theorizing. Kevin, maybe you want to start?
Sure. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting, Kathy, when you were talking, that jumped out at me is, oh, okay, that's something that might help someone understand the difference between what you do and what Denny does, was you said that something that was very important in your method was the controlling of variance. That you wanted to control the variance and then really focus on that variance in which you're interested in studying. And I think one of the things that comes out of an interpretivistic perspective is this notion that variance is really interesting. And as a grounded theorist out there trying to understand a phenomenon from the experience of those living that phenomenon, I want to gather as much variance as possible. Right? And I think that leads partly to the need or desire at some point to begin to try to structure your data, because as an interpretivist theorist, I'm out there collecting a lot of stuff, and I'm trying to make sense of it and try to understand how this helps me understand this phenomenon better. And then I have to pivot a little bit and say, well, how can I help my reader understand this phenomenon, because they don't get the value of being absorbed in all this data. And so I think, interestingly, this different way of thinking about variance and the fact that we're less interested in controlling variance, we're more interested in capturing those variances and trying to understand why they exist, leads to the need to find a way to structure that data so that our reader can understand. So that's one thing that I found interesting.
Yeah, let me just talk to that. I think one of the reasons why controlling variance comes up in my world is because we are using multiple cases, and I think that actually is the huge difference. So if you were doing an identity study and you were using a major university and you wanted to do a multi-case, would you control the variance by looking at another major university, or would you try to make it more generalizable model by looking at a corporation or a government? Or so I think the real big difference is that I'm a bit more in the multi-case world, because I think in our world, once we've found the phenomenon we want to focus on, then we are all about variance too.
Well, obviously, process approaches don't work when you want to look at variance. But addressing what the two of you said, I mean, I can quite see that an approach where you want to explain variance and you have a small sample, you really need to control for everything except the main things that you are interested in. What I see as one of the differences is that what does the theoretical product in the end look like from these two people's research and from mine? And what kind of generalization would be possible from that? And what I see that Kathy is doing is kind of abstracting out from a series of cases those constructs which enable you to explain the difference. So you're really abstracting out all of the richness of the particular stories to focus on those precise things that make the difference. And that's a very important thing to do. Whereas an interpretive researcher might want all that messiness to be present because they have a different conception of what generality is. They want to be able to, they would have a notion of transferability, which is you would put as much richness as possible so that the reader themselves could see to what degree the story you are telling finds resonance. And that's an entirely different, for me, an entirely different approach to theorizing. And there is not one is better than the other, that they are both contributing in different ways to our understanding. But you do need to know which of those you want to do, I think, when you're developing a study.
I think not. I think my cases are probably as rich as Denny's, although maybe not quite. No, but what you can't. What I was trying to say before is you can't write it. You can't write about the 5 cases in the richness that you can. You just can't write it in 40 pages. It's not possible. The other thing is, actually, you know, you've said a couple times to me, and I somewhat feel chagrined. You know, I got told to use the Eisenhardt method, and as I said, being told to use the Gioia method is I have a new perspective on that. So, but I have also lately been told that I can't have a process study and a variance study in the same study, and I think that is also not true. I think you can have, in my world, you can looking at 2 or 3 companies, and you can see the processes going on this way in one, and it's going on this way in another. In fact, I'm looking at Anne Claire Pesch and Philippe Santos, who have a very nice paper on social investing, where the processes are different in the different. And so you can have processes with variance. So the update on that diagram may be antecedents and outcomes.
I mean, I think you can mix process and variance, but it's hard to put all that in one paper.
That's the problem.
And I've tried that. I also think that in a process study, multiple case studies can serve a different kind of role from the one that you are suggesting. And that is, the more different the context of your cases are, and yet the same process is occurring. That's a very powerful way to show that this process that you were describing actually has some generality. It's not just something that I found in one particular context. So if you can see rather similar sorts of dynamics occurring in different contexts, I have found that quite difficult to publish, but the replication is for finding the same rather than finding difference.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, something sometimes we think about too, is because you're trying to figure out where do you want the variation, how do you want to handle generalizability, where do you want the control of the stuff you don't care about, and so you're balancing all of those things. So in the ideal world, let's say Kevin, if he and Denny were to do the study in the university again, you might do it at university, but you might try it out in a corporation and then see, which maybe you've done and I've missed, but one could do that and then see what parts of the process that we saw at the university are the same at the corporation and what are different and what explains it, perhaps. One could do that.
Well, thanks for those thoughts. Let's maybe offer the audience some chance for some questions.
Thanks. So I appreciate this. I get it. I have a good sense now of the differences between the different methods. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your creative process. I'm wondering are there differences between you? There certainly are, I'm sure, differences, but to what degree is your process influenced by your method?
I read Langley and get great ideas about process, and I don't think Denny and Kevin have quite articulated, but I suspect we're all doing pretty similar things, because you're trying to see what your data are saying. You're trying to figure out different ways you can look at the data in some sort of creative way. And I know I might mix and match. Let's compare a case A and case B, or let's compare. I bet you compare. Let's do compare. Period 1 and 2, or you're playing around in all different ways, trying to find the creativity.
I think another thing that pops out to me is that part of this process is really getting lost in your data. And from an interpretivist perspective, that means I need to go out and collect a lot of data and struggle my way through it and really try to understand what's going on. And I know Joel and Vern, you were interested in this notion of theoretical sampling. And at these key points, looking at your data going, okay, what do I not understand? And where could I go in my context to get data that would help me understand that, right? So that process of gathering a lot of data and getting lost in it and then finding your way through it so that when you come out, you have, for me, a plausible explanation of what's going on there. I think that's a really key part of the process. Not necessarily that it's different, but it's just something that I think you don't pick up in a lot of methodology texts and these how-to type of articles. It's that messiness.
You can't. I think Anne's been the best one to write about it for me.
Well, we do actually. I just have a quite recently published paper in International Journal of Management Reviews, which is, I think the title is Approaching the Conceptual Leap, which, it confirms what these two have been saying, but also there's another idea, which is that there's a kind of dialectic process here. So, for example, being very, very familiar with your data, being inside your data being inside you is extremely important. But yet, on the other hand, it's so important to detach yourself from it at some point, because otherwise you just get completely crushed by it. So, there's nothing like coming to the Academy meeting and being forced to do a PowerPoint presentation that you're not ready to do for getting a creative leap, provided the data is inside you. If it's not, the creative leap you could probably get one anyway, but it probably won't be anything to do with the data, and that would not be good. So that dialectic is important. So there's the dialectic between being plunged in the data, separating yourself from it. One is talking a lot to other people, but then not being too influenced by other people, so there's this kind of dialectic there. Reading the literature, being totally imbibed by all kinds of literature, not just in your field, but elsewhere, that is also very important. But on the other hand, accepting chance as well is also very important. So the paper really talks about these different dialectics and the importance of the systematic, disciplined side and the free, imaginative side. And Carl Weick, if you remember, talked about theorizing as disciplined imagination. So essentially, it's a kind of reflection of those two, that tension between the systematic discipline part and the kind of freeing up part. And you've got to have both. I think that, if you stay too close to the data, you end up with something that's very mechanical. But if you're just freewheeling, you finish up with something that has no relation to anything that's actually grounded. So.
Well, thank you. To make sure that we have time for all the 3 questions, what I'll do is I'll ask each of you to ask your question, and then we'll give the panel latitude to kind of go through. Each one of you can maybe address one of the different questions. But since we have about a little more than 5 minutes, we'll go it that way.
So this sort of relates to the things that you were saying, perhaps in response in the last comments that you were making. So I've long been bothered by the hard distinction that's made between induction and deduction, particularly in the early version of grounded theory, which I saw it as you come in as if you were a newborn babe. And the things that bother me about that is that it may not be so helpful to coming out to valid theorizing, and 2, it may be a distortion in some ways of how we got there. So 2 examples. One is much of management research is about what leads to success, but there's the underlying question of how do we define success? Is it profitability alone, for example, or is it other things? Or the other one that comes to mind is the interesting situation of researchers who work for conservative think tanks versus ones that work for liberal think tanks seem to sometimes look at apparently at the same data but come out with different conclusions. And the contrast to this perhaps might be Patton's pre-understandings, that maybe that's what we come in with.
I'm just curious in thinking about our more quantitative colleagues, how we can more effectively engage them. And one thought is to include propositions in our findings and trying to develop more measurable constructs and things like that from what we're seeing in our field sites and various other forms of data collection. But I'm curious if you think there's other means by which we should do this and how much we should be doing it too. So that's mine.
And my question was basically that if you're a quantitative researcher, the assumption is that somebody could go into your context asking the same questions and they would invariably find the exact same results. I'm wondering whether you 3 agree or disagree on whether a qualitative researcher, even using your same method, with the same general research question or sensitizing concepts, would come in and find the same results that you did, and what that says about the sort of truth claims that you make or do not make.
Thank you. Well, 3 provocative questions. I'll allow you to share your thoughts.
Which one? You go ahead. I don't mind. I can take it. I don't want one.
I'll take 3.
Just interested on that last one. I think if you read what interpretivists believe and kind of understand the philosophical underpinnings of interpretivism, you wouldn't expect 2 different people walking in with the same research question to find the same explanation for a phenomenon, for the same phenomenon they were looking at. And I think perhaps this is getting to the second question, why it's difficult for a lot of our colleagues who have been trained in much more positivistic quantitative methods to struggle with what we do, because we're not making a truth claim. Interpretivists are not making a truth claim about what we find. What we're saying is, look, I'm providing some deep insight into this phenomenon that we couldn't get without engaging these people who lived with it. Now, whether or not this is quote unquote true or not, that's the next step in the process. We're going to have to test these theoretical insights in lots of different contexts. But what our job as an interpretivist is to go out there and to gain new insight into these phenomenon from the people who are living it. And so no, I would not expect someone to have been in my dissertation site asking the same questions I did and to come out with the same grounded model that I did, because they're not me. And they didn't interact with my informants in the same way that I did. So that's my perspective. Kathy, you're smiling.
Yeah, because I think the opposite. I think if you went into my cases if you asked my research question in my cases, you would get pretty much the same answer as I got. What I would think would be different is, let's say, Anne might choose a different question, or Kevin might choose a different question. But I think if you used my question, you would see what we saw. So I guess I would differ on that one. I also think as far as connecting with our deductive friends, I do think theoretical sampling is mind-blowing for them, and so one does have to explain that. I think the other thing is, if we're actually doing the same thing, I don't think we should invent a different term. I don't think that adds value. If we're actually doing something genuinely different, we should call it something else. But otherwise, I don't know what else one has to. They do like propositions. I will say that my deductive editors like propositions, and I give them to them. And all's good.
I tend to push back.
Well, there you go. Anyway.
Well, I guess I have to address the induction-deduction question.
Because we know that was set for you.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think that we emphasize too much the idea in induction that we are completely theory-free, and I actually think that what we're doing is abduction rather than induction. I mean, induction for me implies that you're generalizing from empirical observation, and that there is not really any a priori theory there, so that that's a very dangerous thing to do. So I think you do need to connect to prior theory. And most of the studies I do, very often we go into a site with some vague idea about the kinds of theories that we're interested in. We collect some data that makes us think about some other angles that might be interesting, and then we go to the literature and search for theories that would be relevant. And usually when we do that, we can see that the theories that are relevant can take us part of the way, but not all the way, and it's only the remaining piece that we contribute. So we add. I mean, so that both induction and induction are present in a kind of cycle. So that, and there's a word for that, and it's abduction, which is connecting what you see in the empirical world with theoretical ideas, which are also out there and can be developed. Of course, you do have to have something over and above what is already expressed in theories. And that's why I said that the labeling approach to theorizing doesn't work, where you, and a typical example I give is actor network theory. Actor network theory, unfortunately, is so wonderful. You can explain everything with it if you just label things the correct way, but you will not make a contribution to actor network theory by doing that, because it will stay the same. It is not, you've not added to it. So you do need to have that. Quite often my studies have a section which is called theoretical framework, where I say, well, this is what the theory says, but this is what we don't know. And that gives me enough to move forward.
Well, thank you for those insights. Joel, do you want to make some closing comments?
I think we've exhausted all of our time. I want to thank the audience for being here with us today. I want to thank our panelists who are here live and in the flesh, and Denny, who is remote in Happy Valley. Please join me in thanking everyone up here. Okay, thank you all. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
But